Good morning. Happy Monday, friends. Welcome. My name is Libby, and welcome to my audio journal, Finding Joy in the Shadows. Each week, I show up here to talk through the fun curveballs life loves to throw our way, and I help us look for those little pockets of joy that still manages to sneak its way in, even when we are having our most messiest moments. This space is part reflection, part resistance, and part love letter to anyone who's struggling and still showing up. I will say I am still working through my own stuff in real time. And if something I say or share helps you feel a little less alone or a little more grounded, then that's a good thing. That means that we're doing this work together. For today's conversation, I thought it might be interesting to spend some time hypothesizing what life would be like if we found joy in being wrong. What a concept, right? Celebrating our errors. Um, but before we dive too far ahead, per usual, let's take a few minutes to catch up on some pretty interesting stories that came across my radar. Um, I don't know if they're 100% a Libby's problem. I think one definitely is probably more real world, but it sounds like a Libby's problem for sure. First one on the docket is lab grown meat. Have you all heard of this one yet? So, this is one of those headlines that legit made me stop mid scroll, blink a few times, and go, okay, what? What? Did I read that right? Lab grown meat? Yeah, you heard me correctly. Apparently, this is a real thing. It's called cultivated meat or lab grown meat, and it's made by taking actual animal cells and growing them into muscle tissue in a lab. That's right. They're out here growing chicken nuggets in beakers, peeps. And I am just finding out about this now. Anyone else hear about this before, or are you today years old when you're hearing about lab grown meat? Now, to be fair, this isn't tofu in a trench coat pretending to be meat. It's not an impossible burger in disguise either. This is actual meat, just made without the cow or the chicken or the tiny, sad little piglet named Wilbur staring into your soul. There is no slaughter involved here. And because of that, it's supposed to be more ethical and more sustainable. Okay. Well, when you put it that way, I would be lying if I said I wasn't intrigued. But here's the part of the story that really stood out to me. Some states are trying to ban this. States like Florida and Texas in particular. They're like, nope, not in our state. They feel it's too unnatural, it's too risky, too disruptive to quote unquote traditional agriculture. And it made me pause because I think, like, let's not get this twisted. I don't think these states care an ounce about traditional agriculture. They care about money. And we all know ranching, that is big business. Cattle associations, beef councils, factory farm conglomerates, their lawyers have lawyers. They've also got tons and tons and tons of lobbyists. And those lobbyists are very good at protecting their bottom line. So when lab grown meat comes along, promising to shake up the entire supply chain, those billion-dollar ranching operations are like, absolutely not. It's the same old song, right? Follow the money. And I gotta say, I'm kind of torn. On one hand, I get the appeal of cruelty free meat that doesn't destroy the planet. On the other hand, though, there's just something a little unsettling about eating a steak that was grown in a test tube. I don't know. That's just me. My brain wants to say yes, but my stomach is like, not so sure. Either way, this is real. This is happening. Beaker grown beef is officially on the menu. Okay, so there was that. And then here's another story that I thought kind of would go perfect with that one. So speaking of mystery meat, have you all heard of the Wienermobile Showdown? So I stumbled across this headline that said something like Oscar Mayer hosts its first ever Weenie 500. And I'll be honest, I thought it was one of those fake news stories, like AI generated. I mean, I know what the Wienermobile is, but a hot dog race car or car race, what are we even doing in life right now, right? If that's making headline news. But of course, I fell for the clickbait. And now I cannot unsee what I just saw. So now you're going to have to hear all about it, okay? You're welcome. So picture this. 6 of the most iconic Oscar Mayer Wiener mobiles are lined up. Yes, those giant rolling hot dogs on wheels. And they competed in their first ever Weenie 500. Each was decked out to represent a regional hot dog style, which I kind of think is adorable. You had your Chicago dog, your Sonoran dog. I'm not sure if I'm saying that right. And then you had your classic New York dog, all revved up and ready to catch up. Get it? I will admit ChatGPT helped me come up with that joke. But anyway, they were all revved up, ready to go. The winner, crowned in the Wiener's Circle, complete with a celebratory spray of condiments. Yes, someone somewhere in a boardroom said, you know what this race was going to need? A mustard canyon. And no one stopped them. And honestly, bless that person, because listen, is this the weirdest thing I've read this week? Possibly. But also, don't we all need this kind of weird in our lives right now? Don't we deserve a break from the doom and gloom of everyday news to celebrate 6 giant hot dogs speed waddling around a track for no reason other than pure ridiculous joy? I think we do. Because sometimes joy doesn't have to make sense. Sometimes it comes in the form of a 27-foot long hot dog hauling buns across the finish line. And honestly, maybe that's enough. Okay, so we've got our lab-grown meat entering the market, and we have Wienermobiles competing for who's the best. So those are the LPs that were on my radar last week. I'll have a few more to add in next week's episode. Okay, so hope you enjoyed those stories. They made me giggle. Well, at least the Wienermobile story made me giggle. You should really look it up and see the Mustard Canyon in action. I just highly recommend. Okay, let's go ahead and get started. I've got my iced coffee in hand. Lulu Joy is at doggy daycare, so once again, no background opinions. No noise, no words of advice from the peanut gallery. If you are ready to dive in to today's more like hypothesis, then I'm ready as well. So for the rest of our time together, I want to invite you into a thought bubble I have been sitting with for quite a few years now. What if being wrong was actually seen as a good thing? Like, really sit with that idea for a minute. What if instead of bracing for impact every time we messed up, we started treating mistakes and being wrong as something worth kind of honoring? Maybe even celebrating just a little. Now, I'm not saying we should be throwing ourselves a parade every time we flunk a test or when something we said or did hurts someone, but hear me out. Living spiritually has taught me that at the end of the day, our life's purpose isn't to get everything right. It's actually to learn, to grow. But if we stay conditioned by culture, by institutions, by each other, to fear failure, to fear being wrong, to strive for perfection at all times and never be willing or able to admit when we mess up, if being wrong is treated like a permanent stain, something we can never, ever come back from, then how can we possibly expect ourselves, or anyone else for that matter, to fully learn, let alone grow? I saw this post the other day, and I wish I could remember who said it, but it went something like, newsflash, none of us make it out of this life alive. We all die at the end of this journey. And that thought just stopped me in my tracks. Because yeah, that's the truth, right? That's the one thing we all have in common. And yet we spend so much of our time walking around like we've got something to prove. Terrified of messing up, terrified of being wrong, terrified of admitting it when we are wrong. But what if being wrong is actually part of the magic? What if it's how we learn, how we grow? What if the biggest mistake we make isn't the error itself, but how we treat ourselves or each other when it happens? That's what I want to explore today. The joy of being wrong. The freedom that can come when we stop punishing ourselves or each other for being human. Now, I grew up in a very loud household. There was a lot of yelling, a lot of shouting, a lot of volume. We're talking big personalities, strong opinions, and a whole lot of passion crammed under one roof. Arguments? Yeah. Full-on battles? Lots of them. And somehow, that was my normal. A conversation in my house growing up could start out very casual, over nothing of importance, and if I wasn't paying enough attention, it could turn into a full-blown argument in about 3 seconds. I don't want to say I hated it, but as I got older, I started noticing how often I think, wait, How did we get here? Why did this have to escalate so quickly? Why couldn't we just stay in a calm, civilized conversation instead of detouring through a full-blown screaming match before finally talking it out like human beings again? Looking back, I can see it more clearly now. It wasn't just noise, it was dominance, a power struggle. It was more than just living with the fear of being wrong. It was the refusal to even entertain the idea that we could have been wrong. And I learned very early on that admitting defeat, or even just acknowledging that we might have been in the wrong, meant losing ground in the struggle to maintain power. Everyone was trying to make sure their voice was the one that carried over the others. And when you grow up in that kind of environment, you learn pretty quickly how to read a room, how to spot the landmines before they're lit, and most importantly, when to just keep your mouth shut. Not because you have nothing to say, but because you've learned how easily one comment could spark the next argument. Over the years, I started noticing all the ways that that type of early conditioning shaped how I navigated my life, especially when it came to conflict, control, and pushing through discomfort. And weirdly enough, one of the places that showed up for me the most was running, or when I was running. Now, for those of you who've just met me through this podcast, I haven't talked a ton about this here, but I've been trying to be a runner since 2017, when for charity, I decided to run a marathon. Now, truth be told, I had absolutely no business training for a marathon. I was significantly overweight, completely out of shape, and I had never run a day in my life. And yet there I was training for the Twin Cities Marathon here in Minnesota. To add insult to injury, I'm also pretty short. I got tiny legs, which means my stride is tiny and my pace is, well, let's just say leisurely. My running pace is equivalent to most people's walking pace, okay? But honestly, I don't care. I love it. That runner's high, totally addicted. I will say, though, it took me 7.5 hours to complete, but I did cross the finish line. There wasn't too much fanfare by the time I got there. The crowds had all gone home. They were literally dismantling the stage as I arrived. But a few family and friends waited for me just to celebrate that moment, to celebrate that I did it. Now, I kept training after that, not to run any more marathons. No, I was done with that. One was plenty. But I kept training so I could become a stronger runner, to stay active, to live a healthy life. Enter Coach Katie. Now, every week during my workouts with my homegirl Katie, she pushes me until I hit what she calls failure. Failure is that moment when my legs are moving as fast as they possibly can on the treadmill and I am legit gasping for air. It's that full body, I legit can't go any further kind of failure. That's what Katie wants to see me fighting for each and every time. She wants me to get comfortable running through that discomfort. Crazy? Yeah. A little insane? A little bit. I mean, I get it, right? Why would anyone pay to be pushed to that type of edge? I don't know. Perhaps on some level, maybe I'm a bit of a masochist. But every time I jump off the treadmill, because I feel like I might either puke or pass out, I apologize. I tell Katie how sorry I am. But what I'm really sorry about is that I didn't have the strength or the breath to keep going. Every time I hop off or start walking, I feel shame. But to Katie, when I reach that moment, that's not defeat. She's teaching me that reaching failure is actually a good thing. It means I'm making progress. Because to an athlete, every failure point becomes the new baseline to build from. It's not the end, it's the start. It's the beginning. And that got me thinking, if athletes can do this when they train, then why couldn't we all do this in everyday life? And that got me thinking, what if when we face failure in our lives, it isn't something to be ashamed of at all? What if it's just proof that we're living, that we're trying? I mean, what would it look like to celebrate ourselves even when we mess up? Say the wrong thing? Do the wrong thing? What if we could remove the fear in saying, I don't know, or I messed up, without spiraling or facing such massive consequences so big we feel like we will never recover from it? What if being wrong wasn't the end of the road, but the beginning of something new? What if failure isn't a wall, but instead a doorway? A doorway we could choose to walk through, to have a conversation, to reflect, to talk about what happened calmly and with care. Now, I'm not saying this would magically fix everything. I can't promise sunshine and rainbows, or that consequences might still be waiting on the other side of some of our choices. But maybe, just maybe, it would give us a softer landing in the meantime. So I sat with this idea a little longer, trying to understand how I personally view being wrong, or this idea of failure outside the context of running. And naturally, I found myself at my usual stopping ground online, asking my good old friend, Mrs. Google, to define what being wrong means to her. Truth be told, though, I didn't check Google first. I actually started with Merriam-Webster, but they don't have a definition for the phrase being wrong. They have entries for wrong and wrongdoing, but those didn't quite match the message I'm speaking about today. So for today's conversation, for today's purposes, we are going to lean into Mrs. Google's definition, which says that being wrong generally refers to the state of being incorrect, untrue, or morally flawed. It can also describe a person or action that isn't in line with what's right or suitable. Basically, it's about something or someone deviating from what's expected or considered correct, whether that's factual, ethical, or practical. And here's what stood out to me. Nowhere in that definition did I see the words failure or bad or unredeemable. I think the closest we got was ethical wrongdoing. And okay, I'll admit that doesn't sound great. But even that still falls under the broader umbrella of a mistake, something incorrect, inaccurate, misaligned. Now, I don't want to put words in anyone's mouth. And maybe I'm standing completely alone on this island. Maybe part of the problem is how I view being wrong. Maybe that's what today is really revealing. Maybe this is just a me thing. But if I'm not alone on this island, if a few of you, or maybe even many of you, have found yourselves arriving at similar conclusions, I wouldn't be surprised. Because the truth is, admitting we were wrong is deeply uncomfortable. Not just because we don't like being mistaken, but because we're afraid of what being wrong means about us. That we're bad, that we failed, that we've done something we can't come back from. And yet, how many of us, when we hear the phrase, I was wrong, instantly think, I failed, I'm bad, I'm unredeemable? If that's your reaction, you are not alone. When I looked it up, I realized I had those same assumptions too. So where does that leave us? If being wrong doesn't have to be a character flaw, if it doesn't have to equal failure in life either, then maybe the question becomes, how do we start making space for ourselves and for each other to be wrong sometimes? How do we respond when someone admits a mistake? How do we respond when we are the ones that make a mistake? Because if we want to rewrite the story of what being wrong means, we are going to have to start somewhere. Me personally, I think it starts with grace and some self-love. So how do we actually do this? How do we start making space for being wrong? Not just in theory, but in the moments that feel messy, tender, or high stakes. For me, and I'm still not perfect at this, it started with how I talk to myself. I know that sounds weird, but it is. It started with how I talk to myself. And again, I know that might sound odd, but stay with me. When I encounter those moments, when something's either not going right, or I feel like I've missed something important, or I've fallen short with something or someone, I pause. I check in. I start asking myself some questions, and I go down this little mental list, checking off boxes along the way. Am I doing everything I can? Have I taken accountability where it's mine to take? Am I communicating honestly? And if the answer is yes across the board, then I remind myself, you're doing okay. You are managing all the places you can control. Everything is okay right now. I tell myself, you're doing your best with what you have. You've shown up, you've asked for help, you've looked honestly at your parts. And now it's not just on you. Sometimes the next action item or step now fall on something or someone else. Sometimes it's one person or a group, or maybe it's a work situation or a dynamic we can't fully control. And what I'm noticing is that when I get clear on what is mine to hold and what isn't, it becomes easier to shift my priorities. Not to mention, I give myself some self-love. I say, okay, if there's more to fix, we'll fix it. But you don't have to punish yourself in the meantime. That voice, the one I'm learning to trust, isn't trying to let me off the hook. It's trying to make space for the truth that I'm human. And being human means sometimes I will get things wrong sometimes. But that doesn't mean I'm bad. It just means I'm in process. And I love that. I'm in process. But one thing I noticed from this self-talk is that I'm a lot calmer navigating certain situations, especially when it comes to managing certain situations that used to stress me out. And here's the part that's hard to explain. I don't have a 5-step plan for how to make space for being wrong. I don't have something I can give you for this one. What I do have is a feeling, a hope, a gut sense that it starts with softness, with the way we talk to ourselves, with the way we stop expecting perfection from the people we love, and with the willingness to let being wrong just be part of being human. You've heard me say it before. Focus on the things you can control. If someone else doesn't want to offer us that same external grace, well, in the words of Mel Robbins, let them. You focus on your growth. You remind yourself, yes, I may have fallen short here, but I see it now, and I'm actively working to do better next time. And honestly, if someone has a problem with that, this might sound a bit harsh, but that's a them problem. What do the kids say? Hashtag sorry, not sorry. So, no, this episode doesn't come wrapped up with a tidy bow of an answer. Sorry. But I do think it starts with self love and love for the people all around us, even when they get it wrong, especially when they get it wrong. Because when we start giving ourselves space not to be perfect all the time, that's when we begin to offer others that same level of grace. I don't know where this one lands for you, but I hope something in here gives you permission to loosen your grip just a little. To remember that being wrong doesn't mean we're broken. It just means we're still becoming. We're still in process. It's okay to admit when we fall short. And it's okay to accept that in other people too. Because falling short doesn't mean we failed. It just means we're still growing. I'm still figuring out all of this too. But I'm learning slowly that there's a kind of joy that lives on the other side of getting it wrong. And I want to keep making space to meet myself and the people I love there. That's all I have for today. So I don't know if I've babbled on long enough or just enough, but as always, we will continue to add to this next week. Remember, what we water grows. So let it be joy, let it be truth. Peace out, friends.